Hello, and welcome to Purina's series, Livin' the Farm Life. We know the passion you have for caring for animals and for the life you live on your property, and also what it means to you and your family. At Purina, we do the same thing every day at our 1,300-acre Animal Nutrition Center in Gray Summit, Missouri. This is where we develop the latest in nutrition and care for over 7,000 animals annually across all major species, and have since 1926. It's also how several of us choose to live our lives. So we want to connect with you through the upcoming episodes that what we do here at our farm can help you enjoy and have success on yours. Now let's get started as we share our farm with you and we all enjoy living the farm life.
Welcome to Purina's Livin' the Farm Life series. We are here again at the Purina Animal Nutrition Center in Gray Summit, Missouri, my favorite place in the world to be. And today we're going to talk about sheep. So we are in the sheep and goat area here at the farm. So we have 9 paddocks here. Building behind us is a small ruminant research facility. Got some other buildings up the hill. And I'm here with Mark Johnson. Mark is a Purina sales rep, Purina show feed ambassador, specifically for sheep. And he and his wife have your own sheep farm.
We do, yeah.
And your own horse farm.
Yep, located in Sandwich, Illinois.
So again, we're going to talk sheep today, and I guess, Mark, my question would be, what is the advantage or attraction for someone who's not owning or raising sheep right now to think about getting into it?
That's a good question, and it's one that we get asked quite a bit, because where we live, it's one of those quasi-urban, rural areas. We live in that awkward tweener zone where everybody in our neighborhood has 10 acres, a house, a barn, and either horses or llamas, or there's 3 of us in the neighborhood now that have sheep. And so obviously sheep lend themselves to you can have a successful, viable sheep operation in a smaller area. You know, you don't need hundreds and thousands of acres to have a viable small ruminant sheep or goat enterprise. Is it going to be something you can make a living off of, you know, when you have 10 acres? No, probably not. You mentioned that I work for Purina on a full-time basis, and I do. But it's something that we take a lot of pride in. It's something that we can do as a family. It's something Amy and I do together. Our daughter Emily participated in our farm at home quite a bit. And so it really lends itself to a family atmosphere, a couple working together, something you can grow with and develop. And the small ruminants like sheep or goats, and I'll talk more about sheep because that's what I'm more familiar with, don't require some of the expansive equipment and facilities that you might need for larger animals like cattle, or like the horses that my wife works a lot with. We take a bit more facilities, a bit more land, you know, to make that as successful.
So a lot of people might get into sheep just because they like caring for livestock. It's like you mentioned, it's a family thing, you know, teaching kids how to care for and raise animals. But what's the commercial side? Is there a way to make some money doing that?
Yeah, there is. And right now, the demand for lamb and goat is as high as it's ever been. There was a period of time when lamb didn't sell very well. You know, we were getting $1.25, a little over $1 a pound, sometimes less than that. But there was a generation that really didn't like lamb to eat, a generation of Americans that really didn't eat much lamb. And it was that World War II and post-World War II generation. There was a time when those guys in their K-rations went lamb in a can. All right, and it was usually mutton.
They had enough of that. They didn't
and mutton is a mature sheep.
Yeah.
Okay, that's been processed and for, you know, and ready to eat. But mutton has a very, very strong flavor. I don't care for mutton. It's a little stronger than what I like. I prefer lamb. It has a less gamey flavor.
Yeah.
It has some unique flavor, but not near as strong as mutton. So that generation, they're like, man, don't cook that at home. You know, it just had a stigma to it. Well, as that generation's gone on, the younger generation of Americans are rediscovering lamb because it is so healthful. It's lower fat, higher omega-3s and omega-6s, so it has some real value nutritionally for us as consumers. The other thing that's changed the dynamics of the lamb and goat market is the increase in diversity of ethnicities that we have in this country. Many Eastern Europeans, many from India and over that way. That is, as I think we were talking earlier, and lamb is one of...
Goat is still the predominantly consumed meat in the world.
Right, Hispanic population also eats, you know, a lot more lamb and goat than what the traditional American population has over the last 50 years. And so as those ethnic markets increase, the demand for lamb and demand for goat is at an all-time high. Yeah. People like to eat things produced locally. For a long time, a lot of the lamb came in from Australia and New Zealand. And so as you can grow it locally, you know, just like with any other species you've worked with here at the farm, that growing local, consuming local is big, and lamb is one that you can do that on a smaller scale. Sheep is something you can do that with on a smaller scale.
So obviously there's a meat aspect of it.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people think of sheep for the wool.
Yes, and there are the breed differences in sheep are as dramatic as they are in cattle. All right, we know that there are beef cattle that take all their food and energy and convert it into what? Muscle, meat, you know, steaks. But there's the other side of the cattle business where they take that same food energy and they're skinny, they're tall, they're up here on the hill.
Yeah, and they lactate.
Right, and they produce lots and lots of milk. In sheep, we have a similar scenario. We've got sheep that are raised primarily for meat production. And the hair sheep component has really grown in the last 10 years. Breeds like Dorpers and Katahdins, where we don't have to harvest the wool. They're a hair sheep. They almost look more like a goat.
Yeah.
But they are sheep. And so from a management perspective on a small scale, those hair breeds are very popular because you don't have to worry about shearing them. Yeah. But the wool breeds do have a unique market. Wool prices have been somewhat depressed over the last many years. But in my area, we've got people that have wool breeds because they like to hand spin. You know, the spinning market, the weavers, you know, make it into yarn, process it that way. There's small woolen mills in different places that we actually did this at Klein Creek where I used to work. We'd take our wool, have it processed, made into yarn or roving. I'll slow down a little bit. Yeah. And then people would make it into hats, gloves, etc. And again, locally sourced, locally produced. So for that niche market, and there's the Maryland Sheep and Wool Festival, there's one in New York, and those things draw thousands of people, and most of those are fiber enthusiasts. Okay. So breeds like Cotswold, Lincolns, Corriedales that are primarily wool breeds. They still produce meat. You can still harvest that aspect of it, but they're better known for wool production.
So a lot of things you could do besides just enjoying them and raising them, and so there's a little bit of enterprise that you could have as well. So I live kind of in the area you described. Yeah. I have 13 acres. I don't have any sheep or goats or any animals like that yet. So if I wanted to get into that, again, I think I got enough land. Yep. What do I need to do? How do I need to prepare it? How do I need to set it up? What do I need from a land resource to get into this?
The first thing that we did when we bought our place, because when we bought it, it was bare ground. Okay, it was basically one barn, a little tiny house, and 10 acres of bare ground that wasn't being used for much. So what we chose to invest in first was good fencing. There's that old saying, good fences make good neighbors. Yeah. And I'm here to tell you there is not a truer statement if you're going to raise livestock. Because nobody likes that call at midnight that there's something out running in the road, eating your neighbor's flowers, getting into their garden, you know, or making a mess. So we chose to invest in really good perimeter fencing. That is an investment that if you make will serve you a long time. We've lived there about 30 years, and yeah, I've lived there too long, Kurt, because now I'm having to replace some of the posts I put in 30 years ago, and they don't make posts as good as they used to.
So we have 9 paddocks here, and obviously we're divided here for research and separating them for that. But in a space like this, what's the typical amount of animals per acre or per square foot, or how should I look at getting started like that?
You can pretty safely with sheep and goats. You can run 10 to 15 per acre seasonally, and depending on where you live. Where I live in Illinois, we have a winter. We have we're very seasonal, so we're able to graze on that. We have 10 acres of total farm. I'd say about 7 of it are pasture, and we're able to maintain those ewes on grass from, depending on the year, and there are some variations. If we have a warm, wet spring, we can get out a little early. We'll get out in mid-April. 3 or 4 years ago, we couldn't get out till the 1st of May. Because if you take care of that ground and you take care of that pasture, it'll feed those small ruminants in our area, from 1st of May till sometime in late October as a rule. There's years we graze till November, but I'd say on the average, mid-October, once you get a frost.
When the forage goes dormant, then what do you do?
I think anybody with livestock that has them on pasture and seasonally like we do, if some of the farmers in our area will graze on corn stalks, most of them will dry lot those animals. Because if you leave them on this pasture, I'm sure you guys have seen it here, past November, they'll graze this to the ground, you'll damage the pasture, you'll damage that crown, and we need to leave enough forage there to help it survive the winter. Okay. Because you can do irreparable harm by overgrazing. There's this stigma, pardon me, that sheep have that they overgraze. They don't. We have people who allow them to overgraze. I don't think they're as hard on pasture as cattle or horses, because cattle and horses will do more damage with their feet, especially when it's wet. Okay. Sheep don't have that problem.
So again, we have specific fencing here for what we're doing. Yes. But at home, if I was going to get started, what kind of fencing? How should I set it up? And we've got some electric here. Is electric essential? Is it necessary? You know, how do I do it?
There are a lot of different fencing options. By nature, I don't want to say I'm lazy, but I don't want to do things twice, and I don't want to make more work for myself than I have to.
Most of us don't.
And so we have all high tensile electric fence, which this is also high tension electric. We have single strand where this is woven. Either works. I prefer the single strand because it's easier to fix, easier to put up, easier to maintain. If a tree branch falls on woven wire, you're going to have a project in fixing it and it'll never look as good as it did when you put it up. With the single strand high tensile fence, it's relatively easy to fix. There's several suppliers out there that sell good fencing supplies for the high tensile, both the woven and the single strand high tensile electric fence. And they have books and diagrams and videos that is see-spot run how to put it up. And that investment, because we need fence with small ruminants to do two things. We need them to keep them in. We talked about that.
Right, because you want to be a good neighbor. You don't want your neighbor calling you saying, hey, get them out of my yard.
Exactly. And the other thing we have to worry about is predators. With sheep and goats, they're very susceptible to coyotes. We've got a bunch of timber behind our place where a guy runs some cattle, and he's a conservancy type situation, and we are loaded with coyotes. On the hayfield next to me, we can hear 10 to 15 coyotes and their pups howling all night long. And if you raise sheep,
we're in coyote country right here.
And sheep and goats, that'll keep you up at night.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's coyote bait if you're not careful.
Okay.
So that good fence, and with the purebreds that we raise, there's some serious value out there.
Yeah.
And I can't afford to have them. That's expensive coyote bait. The other thing is we have houses really close because I kind of described the scenario where we live, and all of them have a dog, or two, or three, or four. And prior to us moving in there, they thought, oh, we can just turn our dogs out. We live in the country. I understand that. I understand where they're coming from. But I don't want to meet my neighbors by handing them their dog because it was out chasing our sheep.
Yeah.
And so by putting up a good fence that will keep the coyotes and the dogs out, even the friendliest dogs, it really prevents those kind of headaches and those kind of problems.
Okay. So as I drive around this area, I obviously see people that have sheep. I often will drive by a property and I'll see sheep and goat mixed in the same pasture.
Yep.
Is that something that we should do, avoid, or what's the issues with that?
No, a lot of even big and small producers will sometimes run sheep and goats together, and that's something you can do. Goats are more browsers. They'll eat some things that sheep may not eat as well. Some of the more brushy type stuff, where sheep pretty much stick to the sweet grass. They like the good stuff. And that's where managing those pastures, rotationally grazing them. We clip them after we take a group of sheep off. And when you put sheep and goats together, you don't have to do that as often because they complement the grazing patterns. And the only thing you got to watch is sheep can't have goat feed. Sheep cannot have goat mineral. Goats require a certain amount of copper, so there's supplemental copper in their diets. And it doesn't take very much copper to kill a sheep. So we can feed.
Big caution for anybody that's thinking about doing that.
Yes.
It's so fine to do it. They'll commingle together. They'll get along fine. They'll work the pasture doing their own thing.
Yep.
But when you feed them sheep feed if you got sheep and goats together, not goat feed.
Goat feed cannot be fed to sheep.
Okay, so goats need mineral.
Yes.
How do I separate them to make sure that my goats have the mineral they need at the right time?
So there are certain times of the year that you won't run the sheep and goats together. Generally, unless you raise, a term where you get weather kids or something, you just fatten them up for market. That's a different scenario. They won't live long enough because they'll meet market weight quick enough that they can be without mineral for a little while and it's okay. But otherwise, you're going to separate them during breeding season.
Okay.
You're going to have to get those billies and the does over here and the ewes and the rams over here. And so when you do that, you feed sheep mineral to the sheep and you feed goat mineral to the goats.
Okay.
And by doing that at those times of the year when you have to separate them, you can kid them and lamb them together. My preference would be to try to keep those separate if you can. Again, that's another time of year when you wouldn't want to commingle them. And when they're not commingled, you feed the goats goat feed and goat mineral. Okay. You feed the sheep feed and sheep mineral. And then the rest of the year you'll probably be okay.
Okay, since we're talking about feeding, obviously ruminant animals, pasture is important, grazing is important. What about supplemental feeding for sheep?
Supplemental feeding on sheep. So we'll start with, we're coming up on breeding season. Sheep by nature are seasonal breeders. There are breeds that are exception, like some of the white-faced Dorset influence we have here that you see behind us and around. Those will cycle all year round. The majority of sheep breeds are seasonal breeders. They only breed when the days start to get shorter. Everybody thinks it's temperature. Temperature will affect the fertility of the males, but otherwise it's the length of day, the photo period. So by nature, most sheep breeds will start coming into heat August as the days start to get shorter, and so that's your breeding season. So we want to be out ahead of that by about a month. So 17 days prior to breeding season, you deworm, you vaccinate your females, make sure they're all ready to go, make sure those rams are in good shape, make sure their feet are trimmed, and that's when we'll first start supplementing those ewes. Because by flushing is what it's called, and we're not talking super ovulation, that's a whole different gambit that we're not going to get into, but when we talk about flushing ewes or does, you increase their plane of nutrition 17 days, 21 days prior to breeding. Doing that, you prepare that ewe's body for reproduction. It'll do two things. It'll increase their ovulation rate. We want sheep and goats to have twins. Mother Nature set them up to be able to raise twins. They will have triplets and quads, certain breeds. Yeah, it's okay. For the twins is good with me. I'm not a great nursemaid. I'm not a fan of bottle lambs. Some people really like that. I work off the farm. I would just assume they had twins because it costs the same to feed that ewe if she has one or two. And when she has two, it makes me more money. So by flushing those ewes prior to breeding, we increase that ovulation rate. The other thing it does is it kind of syncs them up. I don't like to be lambing for 4 or 5 months. I'd like to narrow that lambing window so that I can manage them together, wean them together, and it just makes the rest of the year so much better. You can market them together, which is nice. So by flushing the ewes, we increase plane of nutrition, do those two things.
All right, so we're Purina Animal Nutrition. We obviously make a sheep feed. We use this facility to help test, develop, research, prove that our feed does what it does. What's the key? Should somebody look for when they're supplemental feeding their sheep? What's the key ingredients or nutrients in a diet that they need?
For sheep, as whether they're growing lambs or flushing ewes like we're talking about, and then we'll feed them again the last trimester because that's when most of the fetal development occurs, their mammary production starts to kick in, so they're going to have an increased energy requirement then. So I like to on our sheep feed stay somewhere between 14 and 16% crude protein. Protein's important for building muscle. Protein's important for maintaining good fiber in the wool breeds. Strong feet, I mean hair, feet, wool is all based on protein. You know, your hair is protein, your toenails, your fingernails, and the livestock are the same way. So 14 to 16, you're in good shape. 14 to 16% crude protein. After that, we look at energy level, and that's really most readily read on the feed tag in terms of fat. Okay. And so depending on your breed and the stage of life, anywhere from 2 to 5% fat. The mature animals, unless they lack body condition, that 2 to 3% is going to be about your target. Okay. The younger growing lambs, 4 to 5.
Okay, so if I'm supplemental feeding and this is my pasture and I got it set up, I say I got my water over here, I got a feeder here, any keys to how I set it up?
Yeah.
Where do I put my feeder? Where do I put my water? What do I want to think about when I'm doing that?
Water is the most important and most often overlooked, and that is the thing that makes chores take longest. Yeah. And so we try to use, much like what we have here, we have tanks that sit in our fence line. I do haul water to my pastures because I don't have water lines running all through my pastures, but I have a big tank that goes either in the back of the pickup, the back of the gator, or the loader tractor, and we'll haul water out there. But in our dry lot scenarios like these and what we have over at the other facility, I like to put a hydrant right in the fence line, because then I can put the tank underneath it and I can water 2 pens. Okay. I put electric there because we also have to worry about water in the winter. Yeah. And where I live, keeping that water from freezing is important. Yeah. And you want to set it up in your operation so that you have to use as few hoses as possible. Because what do we know about hoses in the wintertime?
Yep, they freeze.
They freeze, and they're a pain to drag around and haul around. And the other thing I try to avoid is individual buckets. I do not want to haul and fill buckets every single day. We'll do that in the lambing pens. Yeah. We'll do that for a ram pen or something so we can keep fresh water in them. I don't want a 150-gallon tank for 2 head of sheep, because you're not going to keep it clean and fresh enough. Yeah.
Any theory behind how close my feeder is to the water or the proximity of the two?
In a dry lot scenario, because typically, as I mentioned, in the fall, winter, and early spring, we dry lot them. So my preference is, and this is a little bit unique, I like to put my water outside the barn. It keeps your barns drier. Managing that environment when you're dry lotted or in the barn is hard, because you want to keep that barn dry. They're healthier if that barn is dry. We use straw, we use various beddings to keep that pen clean and dry. But if you keep that water outside, sometime in your development of your operation, someone's going to hit that water tank. Someone's going to hit that hydrant. You're going to have a busted water line, and you'd much rather have it be outside the barn than inside the barn. So I like to keep them outside. Feeding, where you put your feeders, I have portable feeders similar to these and similar to some of the other ones we have available here to look at the farm, and I like to move mine. I like to feed outside as much as possible. I do that because I think it's healthier for them. There is nothing wrong with getting those feeders exposed to sunlight, rain, heat, and temperature. There's no better disinfectant.
Yeah.
And so I like to feed outside. As I've gotten older and time sometimes is an essence, or you're trying to get chores done before you go to church or go to work or go to school, or inevitably take your wife out to dinner.
Yep.
There are times that of the year I will move those feeders inside, put them right up against the alleyway in the barn so I can walk through the barn, stay clean, throw it over the fence, and walk away.
Okay, so you've mentioned barn several times, and I don't have a barn.
We can work on that.
So what kind of shelter do I need while you're helping me build my barn? So we've got some little shelters here.
Yep.
That's obviously important. They need some shade. Gets awful hot here.
Yep.
So something to think about when you're setting up your pasture is...
I am less concerned with shelters in the pasture. Sheep, the #1 sheep state in the country is Texas. Do I need to say more?
No.
It's pretty hot, and they survive there really well.
Okay.
So I'm less concerned with shelter out here. I have portable shelters that I use. I took old hay rack running gears and I jacked them up in the air. So I can move them from pasture to pasture to pasture. The other thing it allows me to do is it's not stuck in one spot. One of the challenges with small ruminants is hoof health. You want to avoid foot rot, you want to avoid scald. Areas where they congregate where it stays wet, near a water, near a feeder if you don't move it, or if it's in an area that's low, or a shed that they tend to hunker down in for days when it's hot, or they'll be outside grazing when it's raining. They don't care. That wool is a natural repellent for water. It's got lanolin in it, so they kind of bead the water off. So I don't worry about that part too much, but I'm real concerned about keeping their feet healthy.
Okay, well that makes a lot of sense.
Your barn itself, that's a little bit different story. Yeah, I like it. Doesn't have to be anything fancy.
Okay. Well, I'm going to wait till lumber prices come down a little bit before I start. But,
Okay.
All right. Well, sheep look like a lot of fun. And a lot of opportunity to maybe have a small enterprise part-time and get started. So I think I'm going to get started. I think I'm ready.
Hey, I know a guy, www.anmranch.com. We will set you up.
Okay, well listen, if you want to get started with sheep on your property back home, come see us at PurinaMills.com or stop by your local Purina dealer. They are experts and they have the product that you need. So until next time, enjoy living the farm life.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Livin' the Farm Life. Watch for future programs played the third Wednesday of the month we air at 5 p.m. Central Time. And as always, reach out to your local Purina dealer or PurinaMills.com for additional help and resources. So until next time, enjoy your farm.